It's All Things Considered. I'm Dave Lawrence, and
what we have in mind is breakfast in bed for 400,000.
Today we're talking with the guy who said those remarks famously at Woodstock 69, Hugh Romney to some, Wavy Gravy to many more folks. He's coming to Hawaii, part of a benefit concert with Jackson Browne, Joan Baez, among performers at the MAC. Coming up on Saturday, benefit for the Seva Foundation's blindness prevention programs. Also a night honoring legendary figure Ram Dass, who lives on the Valley Isle. It is Wavy Gravy talking to us. Aloha, Wavy. Dave Lawrence, Hawaii Public Radio.
Aloha, David.
Hey, brother.
It is.
Can you hear me okay?
I can indeed. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, crystal clear.
Excellent.
I grew up with you, courtesy of my mom's Woodstock albums, with you doing those famous stage announcements, and of course countless others have their own introductions to you, the film itself. You were there too at Woodstock 94, as I recall.
I survived 3 Woodstocks. The first one made me famous, the second 2 got me paid.
Right.
And that breakfast in bed announcement was quite spontaneous, although it was picked by Entertainment Weekly as one of the top entertainment lines of the 20th century. What we were actually doing was getting granola that we put in Dixie cups to give to people who were enmeshed in mud in their sleeping bags in the front of the stage.
That's what actually the breakfast consisted of, huh?
Hippies had never seen granola before. What is this, gravel?
And you started a whole movement because now everybody associates granola with hippies. Amazing.
And the granola manufacturers of the world owe us an enormous debt.
Yep, some residuals would be nice for that. That's great. I never knew that's what the actual breakfast was. Well, it's wonderful to get to finally connect with you, and you've got quite a story way beyond some of that stuff. And first explain for folks who are curious about this benefit, and how about the Seva Foundation and the blindness prevention programs? Let's shine a little bit of light on that aspect of this weekend.
Seva, it's spelled S-E-V-A, but it's pronounced Seva, is a Sanskrit word that means service to humankind. And we work in curable and preventable blindness, as 80% of the blindness in the world is reversible. And for $50, people can get their sight restored through cataract surgery. And we have performed over 4 million cataract surgeries in the 40 years that we've been up to stuff. And I'm very, very proud of this. That's a lot of people not bumping into stuff. We started in Nepal and India and then branched out, and now we're in, 20 countries.
Wow.
And hopefully someday the lines will cross, and the blinding people and the reversible blindness will all blend, and nobody will be bumping into stuff anymore.
Is that the primary function of the Seva Foundation, is dealing with blindness, or are there other issues?
It is. We used to do other things, but we decided to focus on one thing and do it well.
And this is blind.
And there are 38 million blind in the world, and the number one cause of blindness is cataract. Now, we're even doing stuff in the United States and on Indian reservations, which is very important, not only doing cataract surgeries, but doing all kinds of optical things and getting glasses to the people.
What made you so passionate about this?
Well, I think that when we first started, there was a whole bunches of us that, a bunch of the docs and the health workers who worked on the eradication of smallpox, which is a disease that used to kill millions of people every year, and it was eliminated. Now, the friend of mine that worked on smallpox is a guy named Dr. Larry Brilliant, who's just come out with an amazing book that's going the rounds about smallpox eradication, which is, once again, the first disease in the history of the world to be eradicated. And Larry's returned to the University of Michigan, where he was teaching public health, and his boss, an amazing woman named Nicole Grasset, went to Michigan and said, Larry, we must do something about blindness. Because once again, 80% of the people in the world that are blind don't need to be. And if you're blind in the third world, you're referred to as a mouth without hands. So this was an amazing opportunity. And we got our first grant from Steve Jobs, who flew everybody to Heartlands, Michigan, where, including myself and Ram Dass and Larry and a bunch of the health workers and epidemiologists and Nicole talked to us about taking on blindness. We had a carte blanche to go into Nepal because of Nicole's work in smallpox and also bringing measles vaccine into Beirut through anti-aircraft fire. She got the Legion of Honor, and she was quite an amazing woman, one of the most amazing human beings I've ever met in my life. So it was my job to attempt to get the Grateful Dead to do a benefit for SEVA. Everybody, when they get a great organization, says, "Ooh, we should get the Rolling Stones or something." It's really not so easy. But I had to go get on the plane in Detroit, and I noticed as I got on the plane, who else is on the plane but the Grateful Dead, and they didn't have any parachutes.
Wow.
So I started with the drummers and got them to agree. And Jerry said, might as well do it. And that was the birth of the first SEVA show. And I must have done 50 by now, many different themes. Ram Dass, whenever we needed money for years and years, he would do another speaking tour and raise great sums of money for SEVA to continue. Now, he's about 85 years old and somewhat in a wheelchair and does not leave the island of Maui. So we wanted to honor him, and he picked the artists. Jackson Browne with Greg Lees, Joan Baez, and Krishna Das. Krishna Das is a singer of bhajans and spiritual music. And I'm going to host the show, and it's going to be at the Maui Art and Cultural Center, which we call lovingly the MAC.
Right.
And it's a sold-out show on March 4th. And I'm just really looking forward to spending some time in the sun. We've been deluged here for the first time in a century in California. We're practically treading water.
Well, we got the sun for you, brother. You're definitely going to get that.
The drought is over.
And we have great, that's a great cause to be supporting, and it's wonderful to hear more about I mean, if you grow up like in the Dead, then you have heard, have read and seen their SEVA events through the years and known about them contributing to this philanthropic effort, but it's great to hear the behind-the-scenes story of it, and certainly from a cat like yourself who has this history that goes really far back. And if we can talk a little bit about that, which came first, B.B. King naming you Wavy Gravy or the Merry Pranksters, if you can, and also explain that story of B.B. giving you this name that's lasted so long.
Certainly. But the Pranksters very much first. My wife and I were living in Hollywood, getting ready to do this honoring of the great Lord Buckley, a raconteur who said, "The flowers, yes, the flowers, but the people are the true flowers, and it has been a pleasure to have momentarily strolled in your garden." And we printed that up on a map to this great mountain, Topanga Canyon, called Moonfire, announcing the Lord Richard Buckley Memorial Sunset. And we're ready to do this event when, once again, the rains came in. It's raining and raining, and people said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, let's see how it is in the morning." And I got up in the morning, and it's raining, and I walked downstairs, and there were 35 people in Dago clothes cooking eggs in the kitchen. The Merry Pranksters had arrived to do their show called Can You Pass the Acid Test at the Unitarian Church in the Valley. So eventually, as the rains continued, I said, well, the sunset, let's do this acid test thing. And that was the beginning of that. One acid test led to another. The big one that Tom Wolfe wrote his book about, the electric Kool-Aid acid test, was during Watts, the day after Lincoln's birthday. They rented this huge warehouse in Watts. Buildings were still smoldering from the Watts riots.
Amazing.
And we had these two enormous galvanized ash cans filled with Kool-Aid. And that's when I gave my speech to the assembled audience. I said, let's pay attention here now. This is the eve that LSD was becoming illegal. I said, now, the Kool-Aid on the right is for the kids. The Kool-Aid on the left is the electric Kool-Aid. You get what I'm saying here? Nudge, nudge, you know what I mean? And the Kool-Aid on the right is for the kids, and I went over it about 15 times. But after people had been dancing for 3.5 hours to the Grateful Dead, they were just looking for something wet. And wet happened to be about 200 micrograms a swallow. So half the place started melting down, and this young woman started freaking out and going, who cares? Who cares? And Owsley stuck one of his best microphones into her larynx, and who cares? Went rolling into everybody's DNA. And I crawled to a microphone. I said, look, some sister is unglued, and maybe we can glue her together. If you want to help me, I'll meet you where she is. And I set out in quest of this woman going, who cares? And I finally found her about 20 minutes later into this little side room. She was surrounded by, maybe 15, 20 people, some of which I recognized. We joined hands, and she stopped screaming and turned into jewels and light, and we turned into jewels and light, and that's when I passed the acid test. When you get to the very bottom of the human soul, where the knit is slamming into the grit and you're sinking, but you reach down to help somebody that's sinking worse than you are, that's when everybody gets high, and you don't even need LSD to do that. Now, let us segue to Louisville, Texas, on the Lake Dallas. And we had set up a free stage for the Texas Pop Festival. The pay stage was in a speedway about 7 miles down the highway. And we're like putting on, let's hear it for Cougar Drummer number 6 or whatever. And suddenly this announcement comes over the PA. B.B. King is here with this bus. He's going to play for free.
Wow.
Could we please clear the stage? And I'm getting up real slow. It's before one of my multitude of back surgeries, and I feel this hand on my shoulder. And I look up, and there's B.B. King, and he looks down at me, and I don't know why he says, you Wavy Gravy. I said, yes, sir. He said, well, Wavy Gravy, I can work around you. And he leans me up his amplifier, leans me right against his amplifier, takes out his guitar named Lucille, and from out of the wings on the other side comes Johnny Winter. And the two of them jammed until sunrise, and it was everybody's reward for putting on their pants. And, yeah, they had to put their pants on because the Job's daughters couldn't handle the skinny dipping. Picking up the trash, and a tiny tip of Texas went to heaven. Now, I kept that name, and I was teaching improvisation to neurologically handicapped kids at Cal State. And went into a new bunch of kids, and the classes were filmed and taped through one-way glass by these professors. And I told the kids my name was Wavy Gravy, And the professors came running in after the class. They said, keep that name. You saved a week's orientation. In other words, Hugh Romney was a kind of a boring person that it took me a while to crack through. Well, when I became Wavy Gravy, they just wanted to get down and blow bubbles and have fun. And I persist at this, and in 20 years I'll be 100.
It's incredible. It's an incredible thing, and part of so many people's just their DNA, their background of growing up, especially if their parents were so moved by Woodstock, like a lot of people were, if they were there themselves, in terms of being old enough to remember when it was happening in that part of American society. How did you personally end up there at Woodstock?
Interesting. A couple of segues here. After these acid tests, my wife and I wished for a little bucolic break and rented a tiny little cabin in Sunland, California, in the Verdugo Hills. Got a call from the pranksters that Life magazine was shooting a cover, Life magazine being the biggest publication on the planet at that time, and they were shooting a cover on psychedelica, and they wanted us in the bus, the further bus, to be in this Life cover. So we were honored to go in, met at this gas station, and while we're posing for the cover of Life magazine, Ken Babb steals the further bus to join Kesey, who was on the lam in Mexico hiding out from a reefer bust. So suddenly my wife and I in our one-bedroom cabin have 35 house guests. And the landlord comes by and says, you can't have 35 people living in one room. You're evicted. And in the land of kitchen synchronicity, about a half hour later, our neighbor come down the road and says, old Saul up on the mountain had a stroke. They need somebody to slop them hogs. And so we were given a mountaintop rent-free if we would tend to 40 hogs the size of Davenports. On Saturdays, we took our light show and me and a microphone and energy games to the Shrine Auditorium, where we would do a light show and energy games for the Rolling Stones and the Grateful Dead and the Airplane and all Cream and all the major bands.
Hendrix.
And on Sunday, we would have a thing called Hog Farm Sunday. Yes, they called us the Hog Farm because we were a hog farm. And every Sunday had a different theme, like Kite Sunday, where we flew kites, or dressed like Kids Sunday, or Mud Sunday. There was mud and we slid around. Or one Sunday, Tiny Tim came up and we built a stage for him out of rocks and gravel, and it was just amazing. And those Sundays were always free. And then on Christmas, our mechanics in the family bought us a bus, and we grooved it out, and next thing you know, we were extras in a movie for Otto Preminger called Skidoo,
Right.
with Carol Channing and Jackie Gleason, and Groucho Marx played God. And we were able to get our bus and add another bus to it and start on the road, putting on the Hog Farm and Friends in open celebration, driving across the country, and we'd pull into a college and fall asleep, and suddenly students are banging on the side of the bus. When's this thing going to start? We say, grab a wrench, and eventually we put up these large geodesic domes out of pipe that we'd stretch divots of canvas so we could project on some of the angles, and 10,000 people could move in and out of that, and we'd set up a large painting where we have hundreds of people working on painting together, plastic inflatables and movie projectors and microphones, and everybody was the star of the show. We had to bring your own head. We weren't dosing anybody, but people could come in whatever state they were in, and we set up a palette for consciousness expansion, and very much against the war in Vietnam.
Right.
Now, as we're driving across the country, we got traced out by the people that were putting on the Woodstock Festival. And that's where we got the call. And we were flown in from our little farm in Llano, New Mexico, 85 of us and 15 Indians, into Kennedy. And we thought we were doing fire pits and trails. And we had arranged with the promoters to do a free kitchen. But when we got off the aircraft, 85 of us and 15 Native Americans, there's the world press with their cameras whirling and Klieg lights blazing, and this reporter says, "Oh, you guys are the hog farm, you're doing the security." I said, "My God, they made us the cops." I said, "Well, do you feel secure?" The guy said, "Yeah." I said, "We'll see, it's working already." He said, "Come on, what are you going to use for crowd control?" And I said, cream pies and seltzer bottles. Right. And they all wrote it down. I thought, the power of manipulating the media. So we ended up in White Lake, Bethel, and Woodstock. And how I got chosen to do those stage announcements is the stage was built by this guy named E.H. Beresford Monk, otherwise known as Chip Monk.
Right.
And he was a lighting and sound genius who also used to set me up every now and then as I read my poetry or later did stand-up in the coffee houses of Greenwich Village. So he knew that I could get on a microphone and say hospital, and 5 people wouldn't go break their legs.
Right.
But they would know that there's a safe place that they could go and get fixed if they were injured. So that was my job. I never made any stage announcements announcing any groups, but I always did life support announcements.
Wow. Oh, that's a great division of your work that I never really realized till now. So it was more other people would introduce the bands and deal with the music aspect, and you sort of dealt with the humanity and trying to manage the hundreds of thousands of people's needs.
Yeah, it was Chip and John Morris that introduced the bands, whereas I got on a microphone and I said, "No, the acid is not poisoned. It's just manufactured poorly." And we also set up a situation place where if people were having trouble with their psychotropics, we could help them out, otherwise known as the trip tent. I remember when the first freak out came out, the trip tent, he's going, "Miami Beach, 1944, Joyce." That's it. "What's your name, man?" He says, "Joyce." I said, "No, what's your name?" "Bob." I said, "Guess what, Bob?" He said, "What?" I said, "You're taking a little acid. He's going to wear off." He said, "Thank you." He didn't want to know what third eye, third pie. He just wanted to know it was going to wear off. But 3 hours later, he's ready to go back and rock and roll. We said, "Hold it. You see that sister coming through the door with her toes in her nose? That was you 3 hours ago. Now you're the doctor. Take over." And in that way, the scene regenerated itself, just like the free kitchen was all volunteers after a while. We were exhausted, passed out in the bushes, and everybody took turns. And that was the magic of Woodstock.
Oh, and that's also the magic of getting people to give back, and you did it in such a way, because anybody who's experimented with psychedelics, one of the key things that you just revealed is you just need someone to tell you what you said, that it's going to wear off, just relax, it's going to end, it will only take a certain amount of time, and then it will go. And what you did was harness the goodwill, and it was basically like saying, "Hey, we helped you. You know how to get through it. You see this person; they're going through what you were going through. You know how to do it. Give it back to them." And it's just one hand washing another, and it must have just continued like that.
This is correct, and we still have our hog farm. We have a 700-acre ranch. We have a little hippie Hyannisport here in Berkeley, a 13-room big house, 13 bedrooms. And 3 hours north, we have a 700-acre ranch where I run Camp Winter Rainbow, which is a circus and performing arts camp. We use 13 acres of that property in a circle of 17 teepees, and we do 700 kids a summer from 7 to 14, 150 at a time. And people ask me, what's your greatest legacy? And they expect me to say Seva and 4 million people not bumping into stuff. But actually, it's the kids who have come out of Camp Winter Rainbow for the last 40 years. I don't go anywhere in the world that I don't run into people who've been to camp or have known people who've been to camp, and it's just extraordinary. And they learn juggling, tightrope, trapeze, unicycle, tall stilts. Our theater department goes from improv to Shakespeare. Our dance department goes from jazz and just all forms of dance, bluegrass, you name it. And it's just an astounding thing, but what we're mostly doing are creating universal human beings that can deal with anything that comes down the pike with timing and balance and grace and humor.
Well, that's such a that really goes well with what I was. I mean, when I think about your approach to things, and you have such confidence and can touch on so many different areas in a level of brilliance that makes me wonder, when you were a kid, and forgive me if this information is wrong, but as I researched about you, it said when you were young, you were fortunate enough to actually get to spend some time with Albert Einstein. Accurate?
I was 5. I was 5 years old, and we lived in Princeton. And he just would walk around our block, and one day he asked my mom if he could walk around the block with him. I don't know what we talked about or anything. I remember a shock of white hair that predated Don King by half a century and a twinkle in his eyes. But mostly I remember a peculiar odor, like you remember smells from when you're very young. And I've never smelled anything since, but someday I'll be walking down the street and I'll say, "Hey, man, you smell like Albert Einstein."
And that'll throw somebody.
It was revelatory. Oh, at camp we also do 1 week for grown-ups. It's never too late to have a happy childhood.
And where do people get the information about that?
Let's see. It's Camp Winter Rainbow. .org or Seva, SEVA.org.
And there's no connection to the Rainbow family, or is there with that?
Nope.
Remember them? Do you remember them at the Dead shows?
I've been to many rainbow gatherings, but it got to be too exhausting for me to finish a rainbow gathering and then run a children's camp.
Right.
So I had to retire from rainbow gatherings, although I honor them and support them in any way possible.
And another incongruous element to your life is that when you were young, you had volunteered for the Army.
Ah, my God, you have done your research. Yeah, I was about to graduate from high school. My parents had divorced and remarried and had other kids, and I had no way to figure out how to get to college when my advisor said, "Look, they're going to be cutting off the Korean GI Bill in 1 week." So I jogged down to the volunteered to the Army place and jumped in. And I did 22 months. I actually ended up painting a lot of murals and decorating day rooms and mess halls, and I managed to clean my brush on my uniform of my fatigue uniform until it was every color but khaki. And I'm walking across the base at Fort Dix, and this general pulls up in his car and said, "What army are you in, soldier?" I said, "Yours, sir." Oh, my God. It was hilarious. And I ended up in Germany and trained to do Morse code and jump behind enemy lines and set up Morse code radio stations. Although I never got to do that because we never got to do the tough stuff, and so I was in and out. And it paid for my college and continues to pay for my medical, which is somewhat. I've had 6 major back surgeries. Right now I'm recovering from an injection of cortisone in my low back, which I had a couple days ago.
Unbelievable.
So
you're saying you've been really grateful for, is that a pension? What do they call that residual benefit?
Well, you just get your medical stuff
Covered by
and
them.
I go to the VA, and we have a great one in San Francisco, and they take very good care of me, and have for over 20 years.
That's incredible. And you went to BU, yeah? I went to Emerson.
I went to BU. Oh, I know Emerson very well. Yeah, BU used to have the greatest theater school on earth, and they would fly in the best directors in the world, and the whole school would read for a part, and freshmen could even get leads. The university had people. We were on St. Botolph Street in this beautiful old brick structure with ivy and gargoyles, and they just decided we weren't doing enough social studies, and they were going to move us over to the main campus. Now, all the amazing teachers we had were hired during the time of Joseph McCarthy's Black Ball. So a lot of people were not able to work on Broadway. So BU stupidly hired them. But they didn't want to move over to the main campus, and they all quit. And they were working part-time anyhow at the neighborhood playhouse in New York. And they took me there, and I eventually graduated from the neighborhood playhouse.
Right.
And I had started jazz and poetry in Boston and continued to read my poems in the coffee houses of Greenwich Village, eventually ending up at the Gaslight Cafe at 116 McDougal Street, where I became the poetry director with John Brent, and later segued into stand-up. And I also convinced John Mitchell, who built the place, into adding folk music to the poetry. I made all my money with poetry. Come on, John, let's just try it. And it worked, and we'd have a little folk music and a little poetry and a little folk music. I remember when Bob Dylan came in, he was wearing Woody Guthrie's underwear. I'm not making this up. He was wearing Woody Guthrie's underwear. He said, "Hey, can I go on?" And I grabbed the mic. I don't know what possessed me. I said, "Here he is, a legend in his lifetime. What's your name, kid?" We ended up sharing a room up over the Gaslight, and "Hard Rain's Gonna Fall" was written on my typewriter.
You still friends with him?
Not so much lately. I haven't really connected with him since he did the last tour with Carlos Santana. So that was about 10, 12 years ago.
Wow.
I guess if we bumped into each other, we'd be friends again.
Incredible you mentioned the stand-up, and you're obviously very witty and humorous. Managed by Lenny Bruce, who brought you to California in '62. Was that someone who helped influence your sharp wit?
Oh, absolutely. Lenny was a giant and an amazement and a wonder, and got into trouble with the police, and my job from him managing me was myself and my wife at the time went around trying to get people to type up his law stuff. So I'd run into people, can you type? Come with me. And I'd take them up to 8825 Hollywood Boulevard, which is a house totally surrounded by barbed wire except the front gate. And driveway was always open, so you could just walk right in. Oh, Lenny. What a skyrocket he was. And it was so sad when they started taking him down for saying dirty words, and now, of course, people say those dirty words incessantly in clubs, whereas he would mention Eleanor Roosevelt's knockers or something, and they'd write it down and have him go to court. And then they started arresting the nightclub owners along with Lenny. And so people were less inclined to give him jobs, and so his income fell apart, and he was destitute. It was really tragic.
Oh, it's so true. And what a pioneer, and what heat he took for that. Yeah, I couldn't say it any better. It's really unfair what happened to him. It's something else.
He was a great genius, and you should check into what film is available. And there's a bunch of stuff out there, and it's worth checking out. Him and Jonathan Winters were my two heroes back in the day.
Speaking of comedians, when you were managing Tiny Tim, were you the one who brought him to the Carson show, or?
No. I never managed Tiny Tim. We were just friends.
Okay.
I put together a review with me and Tiny Tim and Moondog. And we opened at a place across from the Gaslight called the Fat Black Pussycat Cafe. And we got raves in the New York Times and the Village Voice. And the next day, the federal marshals came and locked the door for back taxes. And the phone inside is ringing and ringing. And I said, my God, it's the Phantom Cabaret. And so Stephen Ben Israel took me to 14th Street to meet with Julian Beck and Judith Malina of the Living Theater. And they said, well, we've been kicked out of a lot of places, so why don't you come do your show at our theater at midnight? So we changed it to a midnight show, which was really quite wonderful. And at midnight, we'd get together with the cast of the Living Theater backstage, and everybody would go, bong, 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 going for 12, but sometimes we do 20 or 30 of them. And then Tiny would come out with his little ukulele and a shopping bag, and the whole front of the stage is covered with barbed wire from the play that they were doing called The Brig by Ken Brown. So it was just a beautiful image of Tiny there tiptoeing through the tulips, and then I do some improvisation, and then Moondog would close it out with poems and music and weird stuff. He was a blind Viking that had to be seen and heard to be believed. It was an amazing show that was brilliantly reviewed, and then I went out to California to do it again in San Francisco, and got this theater built into a coffee house on Grand Avenue, and arranged to meet Tiny Tim, who was coming out by train, and we were meeting him with a Rolls Royce full of daffodils. When the telegram came, sorry, I can't come. My mother won't let me. Ah! So that didn't work out. But years later, he did come out, and we were doing a Phantom Cabaret across from the Hollywood Ranch Market. And when we closed the show, Tiny went to the Ranch Market. They had a PA, and they had Tiny singing over the PA in the Hollywood Ranch Market. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. It was pretty amazing.
Amazing is a good word to describe your life. You've done a lot of stuff, shared some incredible memories with us. It's a shame you're not coming through Honolulu on your trip, but I'm really blessed to have gotten to pick through some of
Have
the...
you seen the movie?
Say again?
Have you seen the movie about my life? It's called Saint Misbehavin'.
I have not. I plan to, though, now.
It played in theaters. It actually was part of the film festival in Maui.
Okay.
And played in theaters and HBO and all that, but you can get it through Amazon. It's called Saint Misbehavin'. It is a magnificent film that shows us all the way from the beginning of stuff to taking buses over the Khyber Pass, driving from London to the Himalayas.
Oh, and you've lent yourself to a really amazing cause with the Seva Foundation. Just blessed to get to spend some time talking with you today, Wavy. I hope this was something that you enjoyed. I love your stories, man. I appreciate your time very, very much.
Mahalo. This is Wavy Gravy, hippie icon, flower geezer, and temple of accumulated error, and you listening to my good friend, Mr. David Lawrence.
I'm giving you a huge hug, Wavy, and appreciate it, brother.
You.
Thank you, brother.
You bet.
Be safe.
Bye.
Aloha.